Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here, ready to bring to you the next riveting episode in my series covering the Double Dragon franchise. These games have certainly had their ups and downs over the years, with quality varying from all-time greats to absolute bloody tripe. Double Dragon games are like Forrest Gump's box of chocolates, so you never know what you're gonna get. By the mid-90s the brand was stranger than ever, resulting in a bizarre live-action movie, and later even a game based on said movie, for the bloody SNK Neo Geo of all things. Bimmy and Jimmy had come a long way since their original 1987 adventure, but did they go the right way? Today we are going to explore this unique part of history in detail, and analyse exactly what this was all about. Is the dynamic duo's outing on the powerful hardware a hidden gem? Or is this another misstep in the franchise already laden with poor decisions? Let's find out. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Double Dragon, the movie, the game. A Neo Geo fighting title. Yeah! If you have been keeping up with this series, you have a good idea already of the history of Double Dragon up until this point. In 1987, Yoshihisa Kishimoto of Technos Japan gave us Double Dragon, a two-player cooperative beat-em-up that built on his prior Kunio-kun game. The plan for 1988 was to release an update for the first game, but instead the team ended up creating the smash hit Double Dragon 2 The Revenge instead, a title that would influence the entire beat-em-up genre. 1990 gave us Double Dragon 3, which sadly was of poor quality due to Technos outsourcing the production of the game to another party. The game's horrible microtransaction and pay-to-win mechanics also annoyed arcade gamers, and the home Double Dragon 3 game failed to impress consumers either. 1992's Super Double Dragon for the Super Nintendo was much better, and featured some very well done grappling and grabbing mechanics. Sadly though, the game did not look anywhere near as impressive or innovative as Street Fighter 2, so the game faded into the background whilst the Capcom title grabbed all the attention. 1993 would see the brothers fighting in Battletoads Double Dragon, a fantastic British game made by Rare, seeing the duo teaming up with the Toads. To be fair, Battletoads Double Dragon is great fun, but it is certainly mechanically a Battletoads game, with Bimmy and Jimmy as playable characters, rather than actually a new Double Dragon game. 1994 would see the release of the questionably named Double Dragon 5, and this game played even less like Double Dragon than that of the Battletoads title. This versus fighting game was clearly made to try and cash in on the success of Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat, with inspiration from both games being present in this one. This American game, made by Leyland Interactive Media, was artistically based on the American-made children's Double Dragon TV show. However, despite this, it still features gory fatality-like moves. To put things simply, Double Dragon 5 is the personification of the confusing identity crisis the franchise was going through. In terms of said lack of identity through this period, Yoshihisa Kishimoto states many different people worked on Double Dragon's look over the years, and Technos often outsourced the game design and other products to external companies, so there was no consistency to the branding or quality. I personally find it unfortunate, but that's the way Technos handled its titles. So to put it simply, Technos Japan were more than happy to give away full usage and creative control using the Double Dragon brand, provided external parties were simply willing to pay for it. This helps explain some of the bizarreness surrounding the franchise, and why the likes of Double Dragon 5 and the Double Dragon animated show are so drastically different to what players already knew and loved. On top of the game and the animation, Double Dragon would also see the release of a Hollywood movie in 1994, which features a story that is arguably even further removed from the original games than some of the other tripe that came before it. Much like everything else Double Dragon at the time, the movie was produced due to Technos receiving money from a random American company to use the Double Dragon name. Inspiration for the movie, produced by a production company known as the Imperial Entertainment Group, came when the future producer of the film, Don Murphy, stumbled across the Double Dragon 3 arcade cabinet, and from there, somehow this terrible game would lead to the existence of a live-action film. Much like the Super Mario Bros. Movie, the film is complete nonsense that barely relates to its source material. The Double Dragon movie is like many others based on video games, and it's a prime example of a Hollywood film where LA-based corporate bigwigs create a plot that had little to do with the game they were supposed to be representing. As always, whenever producers try and do this, the Double Dragon movie alienated its established fanbase, while simultaneously doing little to generate significant interest from the mainstream. A typical lose-lose situation. The film was both a huge commercial and critical failure, with the Washington Post calling the movie clumsily paced. They pointed out that the characters in the film were amateurishly acted by kids so upbeat they might have escaped from a road tour of Annie. On the review aggregate website Rotten Tomatoes today, it has a negative score of 13%, where the consensus is Double Dragon's clever use of special effects cannot mask the film's overly simplistic storyline and cheesy dialogue, making it one of the lowest rated video game movie adaptations of all time. So, all things considered in terms of quality at least, the Double Dragon franchise was in a pretty dire place. A horrible game, a horrible TV show and a horrible movie were all unleashed onto the world. All of these projects had nothing to do with Technos really though, other than gaining licensing revenue from them. Interestingly, it seems that despite none of the previous 1994 Double Dragon endeavours performing well, surprisingly the Japanese firm would choose to create a Double Dragon game based off of what was established in the failed Hollywood movie, which we shall talk about more shortly. In terms of distribution, without an exclusive home console Double Dragon big hit ever being under the company's belt, Technos Japan would decide to return to their roots somewhat and make the latest Double Dragon game available in arcades. In fact, the game would be programmed for the Neo Geo format, so the game with its high quality 2D sprite based graphics could be experienced on both the AES and MVS, meaning a wealthy individual could truly bring the arcade experience home. In terms of gameplay though, rather than returning to mechanics that made the franchise popular, Technos Japan wanted to cash in on what was popular at the time. 4 years now removed from the release of Street Fighter 2, and the fighting game genre was still flourishing, which meant despite the failings of Double Dragon 5, Technos Japan wanted to use their Double Dragon license to have a crack at developing a fighting game using Bimmy and Jimmy themselves. After all, it was not necessarily because Double Dragon 5 was a fighting game as to why it failed, more that it was a poor fighting game with not enough selling points to it. Surely Technos could do a much better job internally, right? When this game is powered on, like the Street Fighter movie arcade game, the title starts off by showing off some of the action found from the film. This is very brief though and transitions quickly into showing off what their in-game graphics and combat look like. Graphically, this Double Dragon game very much seems to emulate the art style found in SNK's own popular fighting games, such as Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting, Samurai Showdown and King of Fighters. Overall, this means that the game offers a cartoonish yet at the same time fairly mature look, which is mixed with some great sprite scaling effects, creating an illusion that the game's camera sometimes zooms in and out. Basically, the title looks very typical of what can be found in the majority of titles in the Neo Geo fighting arena. In terms of linking this game back to the movie, one of the stages includes a submerged Hollywood sign, and another includes the appearance of Billy's Dragon Wagon within his own custom stage. Further to this, multiple characters in the game have other links back to the film, which we shall get to talking about as we make our way through this video. The game features a selectable roster of 10 characters to choose from, and features 2 boss fighters in which players can take on in the closing stages of a playthrough. Typical fighting game stuff really. In terms of this game's design, Minoru Yamaguchi and Muneki Ebenuma were placed at the helm, the same gentleman who brought to us Super Double Dragon, the most recent decent entry in the Double Dragon series, which would have been a lot better if they had not had to deal with such tough time constraints. In terms of characters who were selected from the Double Dragon universe, we of course have Billy and Jimmy, the stars of the Double Dragon brand. On top of their martial arts skills, we're used to seeing them perform within games. Interestingly, both brothers gain the ability to perform godlike transformations, just like what we got to see in the Double Dragon Bloody movie. Marianne also appears in this game, but rather than holding the role of a damsel in distress like in the classic games in the series, she, like the brothers, takes some pages out of the movie script, and like the film is now depicted as a gang leader who takes advantage of fighting techniques based on figure skating. The game also includes classic Double Dragon boss Abobo as a playable fighter. Just like in the movie itself, he has a super move that turns him into an even more bloated freak. in a similarly impressive transformation. Speaking of stage bosses, one resurfaces here from Double Dragon 2: The Revenge. Burnov, an obese pro wrestler from Detroit feared as the Human Bomb. Apart from those we have talked about thus far, there were also multiple characters made specifically for this game, such as Amon, an ninjutsu master who is present in the game. Apparently his design is based on Yagyu Ranzu from Double Dragon 3: The Rosetta Stone. We also have an Italian street brawler known as Patrick Dalton, who is looking to take down both the game and movie's main villain Shuko. We then have Rebecca Brill, a tonfa-wielding Dutch martial artist who wants revenge on Shuko due to the man she fell in love with turning out to be a spy who worked for him. We then have Eddie Jenkins, a kickboxer from Venezuela who holds the job role of training Shuko's henchman, and Cheng Fu, a comedic character from Hong Kong who claims to be the master of the Drunken Fist. Apparently he is fighting in this game simply because he got lost wandering around LA. Finally, we have the game's bosses, the first of which is Duke, a character who appeared previously as the final boss in Super Double Dragon. In this game though, he also functions as Shuko's personal bodyguard. This obviously brings us to the game's final opponent, Koga Shuko himself, a powerful martial arts master and evil dictator of Bloody Town, who also holds the role of the main villain in the Double Dragon film. In terms of Shuko, whilst looking quite different in the game, in the movie he is portrayed to be a Westerner, even though in the original script he was intended to be Asian. This was due to a demand from producers to place Robert Patrick in the film, due to being fresh off of portraying the main villain in Terminator 2. To make room for this, the script would be altered so that Shuko would acknowledge in the movie that he changed his name to sound cooler and more intimidating. And in behind the scenes footage, Robert Patrick himself would state that the character also believed that he was a reincarnated Japanese warlord. Taking all of this into account, it is quite amusing that such a wacky contrived character would make it into a Technos developed game. In terms of the actual fighting in this game, generally it's your conventional one-on-one versus fighter, however there are still a few elements that set it apart. For starters, this one lacks specific punch and kick buttons, uniform across every fighter like in the majority of games from the genre. And in its place are 4 attack buttons that vary in speed and strength depending on where a fighter is positioned in combat. Fighters also are able to perform super moves via filling up their charge meters, although one interesting nuance is that these meters are easiest to charge when a character performs moves while only having low health, thus meaning fighters gain some extra punch when they reach a state of desperation. We also have a lot of mechanics that had become popular across the fighting game genre by 1995. These include air dashes, air throws and air guards. Overall it's a solid traditional fighter. While in my opinion this fighting game doesn't really do anything egregiously wrong, review sources at the time were overall disappointed with the title, and that includes the game's release on the Neo Geo CD too. GamePro would praise the fighting mechanics that Double Dragon presented, but would pan what they deemed the game's remarkably subdued graphics and concluded, normally Double Dragon would just be average, but the silly aspects and goofy fighters get in the way. Next Generation looked at the game too, giving the title an embarrassing 1 out of 5 stars, stating that the template from which this one came should certainly be retired. But in the meantime, Double Dragon is another in a long line of mediocre fighters for all those fighter junkies who somehow have made room in their heads for 50 different sets of super moves. You could do better. Maximum also concluded that the game lacks originality, had poorly defined sprites and suffered from subpar gameplay compared to other Neo Geo games. Personally, when it comes to this game, I feel that these review scores and criticisms were way too harsh, and it almost feels in a way that the critics possibly went into this one with a bad taste in their mouth already from what had been released in the series previously. There were certainly multiple remarks made that make these journalists' opinions sound very dated. For example, a repeated pattern I noticed from review sources around this period is that critics seem to believe that both fighting games and beat-em-ups were dated concepts in 1995, and that as a result both genres should be retired from gaming forever. In some ways I guess this makes sense, as if you're a full-time video game journalist and you're constantly playing fighters, a genre that may or may not be to your taste, it is no surprise that these journos would have tired of these games before everyone else. So I feel like they may be reviewing the games from the eyes of someone who had played every fighting game on the market, rather than being the more casual consumer who happened to have stumbled across one of these games in an arcade somewhere. Further from this, these old articles stink of the old trope from the period where writers would criticise any game's graphics from the time that were not made from ugly 3D polygons. So anything sprite based, no matter how refined, they would usually refer to as disappointing or uninspiring. In conclusion, the 2D sprite work in this game has aged tremendously, and I feel the journalist was somewhat short-sighted when it came to casting judgment on this one. The game was probably the best Double Dragon in a while, and delivers a perfectly acceptable fighting game affair. As decent as this game is, it was not good enough to secure the future of Technos Japan, who would declare bankruptcy in 1996, ceasing all operations. Their ridiculous business decisions over the years had finally caught up with them, putting the Double Dragon name in even further jeopardy. Fast forward to 2002, and a game by Japanese company Noise Factory, co-developed by Brezasoft and chiefly designed by the Mexican team Evoga, was created for the Neo Geo. This game was envisioned as the successor to the Neo Geo Double Dragon game. However, Evoga was unable to use the intellectual rights for the characters, so the game was instead created as a homage known as Rage of the Dragons, which we may cover someday. As for the Double Dragon brand and Technos Japan's bankruptcy, the brand was purchased by Million, a new company founded by former staff who worked at Technos previously. In terms of Million, we will talk more about them when we visit the next chapter in the mad history of Double Dragon. Technos Japan may be gone, but Double Dragon lives on. Yeah. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the story of Double Dragon the movie, the game for the SNK Neo Geo. Let me know in the comments what other franchises you are keen for me to delve into in the future. It is possible for me to work on YouTube full time, in part due to the people who back this channel on Patreon. As a special thank you, I now deliver an additional weekly in-depth video exclusively to my channel backers. Those who donate $5 a month or more have exclusive access to my video this week covering the history of Blaze Fielding. Beat 'em Up Biopics is one of 4 new series which backers will gain access to on the platform. Come to daddy! Speaking of patrons, huge shoutouts go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, The Murder of Crows, Heo Paulo Lopez, Joseph Rasmick, Luke Samuel Denton, Corey Imarsh Sr., Capcom vs SNK, BXL Gotham, Rowan Dinched, Evan Balder, Philip Nant, Cambo Rambo 82, Azrael Rarakai, Keith Ferguson, Dropkin Varela, Prince Knight, Michael Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, Angel Light 85, Alethea Swanson, Timothy W. Haskins II, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Glennie Glenn, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of the Ted, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Kid Anime, Justin Wang, Aaron McNamara, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Posty XL, Michael Hall, Wesley Sang-hee, Dwayne, Pipe, Langston Miller, Noob, Brian Barry, Stephen Lewis, Sarah Powell, Vlaming Renee, Marvin Araliga, Chris Cool, TOG Driver, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard Stu Stewart, James McDonald, Crazy Yarl, Dan Van Dammit, Adam Castin, Lewis Viant, John Bates, David Bow, Chris Fisk, Paul Elliott, Me Machine Dean, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Hans Christian, Craig Jenkins, Tom Elliott, Retroversion.com, Casey Wright, Synth Spaces, Zai, Andrew Bazansky, Gunther, and everybody else who backs this channel on Patreon. Thank you very much. Bye.